Out of the gate, Paul does. Romans chapter 1, verse 18, he says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth and unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them," or actually what may be known of God is evident among them because God has shown it to them. Catch that phrase, verse 19. Whatever the world can know about God, they know it because God gave evidence of who He is as God to man. How did He give evidence of who He is as God? Verse 20. "For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." On our way to better righteousness verses, we miss one of the most important verses in Romans, Romans 1:20, where Paul just made a statement that actually sounds like a contrast to the teaching of John. John says, or talks about how we've seen God through Jesus, but he quotes that no man had ever seen God. The Old Testament quotes that no man had ever seen God. Paul comes along in Romans 1:20 and says the whole world has seen God. They've seen the invisible attributes of God. They've seen everything there is to see about God. What did it look like? Creation. So man has, we're not talking about New Covenant believers, we're talking about the entire world. So the world has seen all there is to see about God by looking around at creation. They've seen everything that they can see so that they're left without excuse, because although they knew God, they didn't glorify Him as God, nor were they thankful, but they became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. They professed to be wise, they became fools. They changed the glory of an incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, birds, four-footed animals, and creeping things. And so God gave them over to uncleanness. What's the end result of seeing Him only as God? Is man is left in the dark. He's going to do all that he can to compare God to himself. He's going to find God being invisible comes up short. And so all he's left with is, if he wants a tangible God, he's going to have to make one out of wood, hay, and stubble, gold, silver, and precious stones. In other words, he's going to remove consciousness of God. He's going to end up an agnostic or an atheist. There's nothing left. All he has is a creative God. There's no mention of Father in Romans chapter 1, because Paul is trying to show you what God looks like to someone in the world. The best they have, Creator God. The best they have, invisible God. Can't see Him. You might see Him in a tree. You might see Him in the water. But as I get smarter, I'll even replace that. Because I don't need Him in trees and waters and suns and skies. That's what those crazy ancients thought, that there was a God of the sun and there was a God of the moon. And this is where we go as we develop intelligently, and we go, the only thing that's left, you want to see what God looks like, the best version of anything you can build, because you are the best version of what God looks like. That's what man's left with, four-footed beasts. The best I can do. Why? Because I've become the center of my own universe. And it's the least humble place you can be on the planet, is to remove God from existence, because all you're left with is you. If all that you're left with is you, there's no humility left there. There's nowhere to go but down. And so Paul lays Romans out with that thought. And he even does it in language that disturbs us. He does it in language of wrath, which indicates anger and judgment and justice. And we go, I wish Paul had done it without that word. But Paul can't do it without that word for this cause. Because Paul sees the wrath of God as the shadow to the love. That it's the only way that you can ever really understand the love of God is if you can deal with and understand that wrath or that judgment of God. And Paul's going to start that motion in helping you to understand how to deal with that by showing you that somewhere along the way, God intervened in the process of man in order to give man a better picture or a better image. There's no time to go verse by verse, or honestly to even go overhead of each chapter through Romans. So jump ahead to Romans chapter 5, where Paul decides in Romans 5 to drop the word love into the book for the first time. Romans 1, 2, 3, 4, no love, no Holy Spirit. Romans 1, 2, 3, and 4, no love, no Holy Spirit. Paul does this as an agenda. He's opening the book to reach a Gentile who doesn't know God through any other lens than Creator. He doesn't know the plumb line of the Holy Spirit, and he doesn't know the love of a Father. He only knows God through intellect and what he can see. And anything he produces with his own hand, he uses to replace God in his own image. Feeling like whatever I can produce, why do I need a God? Look around, we're doing pretty good without him. That's who Paul's going after in Romans 1. In Romans 5, Paul changed tactics because he's been working up to it for 4 chapters. It was his design all along. I actually believe Romans is probably the best conversational book in the New Testament. I think it's a conversation between Paul and the copyist. The 16th chapter says Tertius wrote this with his hand. And I think Paul and Tertius are having a conversation because Paul writes, this book is very circular. That's how I describe it. What I mean by circular is if you carry on a verbal, if I have a conversation with Mark, we start to talk about something, Mark interjects, I interject, Mark throws something in that's a little bit to the side, and I follow it, and then we stay out there for 2 or 3, and then he brings it back, and I come with him. That's how conversations work. They don't stay on a perfect line, ever. They go like this. But when we're deep into it, they come back. That's Romans. So you watch Romans. Read it that way sometimes. You watch Paul take off. But by the time Paul gets, midway through about 5, he's going to deviate. He's trying to talk about Israel and the Gentiles. That's his opening conversation. That's why he's dealing with the Creator God, because that's how Gentiles need you to talk. The Creator God. Then he's going to get sidetracked with righteousness, and he's going to go out there and deal with sin, and he's going to run out there and deal with the Holy Spirit in you, and then about chapter 9, he's going to come back to Israel and the Gentiles. Chapter 9, chapter 10, chapter 11. He starts there, and then he gets back there. So as Paul starts the turn, he introduces a new character into the story. The